Welcome to WP-Tonic Live WordPress Roundtable, where the experts are here for episode 70. With special guest tonight is Vaskin Hallery from 10 Up, with focus tonight on JavaScript. Hopefully I said your name right.
Definitely, definitely. Thanks, Bill. It's great to be here.
Have a good one.
All right, then. Thanks for joining us. I think we start with, as always, with Sally. Like to introduce yourself, Sally?
Sure. My name is Sally Getch, rhymes with sketch, not spelled like it sounds. And I am the organizer of the East Bay WordPress meetup in Oakland, California, and the owner of WP Fangirl Consulting.
All right, I'd like to introduce our guest, who's Chief Engineer at 10 Up. Vasky, like to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Yep. As Jonathan mentioned, I'm the VP of Engineering over at 10 Up. So I have the pleasure of working with somewhere between 70 and 80 of the greatest WordPress engineers on earth, as I like to say. And we span the gamut from systems level WordPress integrations all the way through front end design and consulting around that level. So excited to be here. Excited to talk about JavaScript. Couldn't be a better day to talk about it with all the excitement in the community around Calypso. So.
All right. Yes. Right. We've got a new panel guest, Kim Shivler. Have I pronounced your second name correctly?
Oh, no, Kim is silent. Didn't do her sound check.
Didn't do your sound check, Kim. I'll go do your sound, Kim. We'll go on to John. Like to introduce yourself, John?
Sure thing. My name's John Locke, and my business is Lockdown Design. I'm an independent web developer out of Sacramento, California.
Oh, great. Maybe you could introduce the news today a bit, John. So what was the development that occurred today, John?
Well, today the WordPress.com they basically launched Calypso, and I'm sure Vaskin has a lot more of the details about it. I just glanced at it like right before I came on. I know that that's part of Jetpack, and it's part of their eventual move toward more JavaScript development.
All right, and like to comment about it, Vasky, because you're the JavaScript king. So, would you like to say something about these developments this morning?
Sure. I think so. From what I understand, it seems that WordPress.com has moved their admin dashboard over into a React and Node-powered interface that runs JavaScript on both the server and the client side to power what they see as a faster, lighter, cleaner, single-page application type dashboard experience for folks running on the WordPress.com infrastructure. So it's a great step forward in terms of use of the REST API. The dashboard interface simply talks to the new WordPress REST API and makes all the updates, changes, pulls in lists of posts and so on dynamically through JavaScript. And so really just leverages that API. I think it's great that as Matt Mullenweg put it in a post that just recently came out, it's a very disruptive thing that's just happened. It's going to open a can of worms, and I think that that's something Automatic is excited and interested in doing here. And so it represents a major split, just like templating kind of represents a split from the presentation layer and the database layer. This represents a split between the presentation layer and the database layer of even the administrative side of WordPress. So the potential to customize the administrative dashboard really by building it from scratch to your own vision is something that is possible as of today, and is something that Automatic has taken a strong step towards supporting by doing it themselves.
Oh, right. So was you surprised that they decided to do this? That obviously 10 Up, you're very trying to find the right word in here, very linked to the core of WordPress and its development. So, but was you a little bit surprised that it happened at this stage, or was it well known that they were going to do this?
So I definitely was not aware. I would say impressed was the initial reaction that I had. I think it speaks volumes that They've clearly been working alongside the development of the REST API and in support of the REST API throughout this process. Otherwise, they wouldn't have put this level of development effort into it so that they could launch nearly simultaneously with the REST API coming into core. So I think from that perspective, what it really showed me today is they're ready to take on the challenge of what it means for WordPress to be a CMS with maybe very separate presentation layers, maybe presentation layers that exist across devices or on completely separate services via OAuth and similar authentication techniques. And I think that it really speaks to them recognizing that the next step forward beyond that 25% number is to make WordPress play nicely in the parts of the ecosystem that hitherto have been an issue. So the enterprise and any sort of web service that can consume JSON, that can issue OAuth tokens, this really brings WordPress into a place where it can play very nicely with those offerings. And I think it's a solid, well thought out next step forward. I'm impressed, like I said, to see them taking it on so early in the game.
Oh, that's great news. I just want to go on to one of the subjects, and I added. I'm notorious for adding additional topics to our round table, Vaskin. So it just goes with the territory. My other panelists are quite used to it now. Drives them crazy though. So I just want to talk about one of the original, the presentation with Catherine Reeve, JavaScript traps and how to avoid them. In my experience, Vaskin, some of the problems that I've been called into to deal with sites that have been developed, a lot of the time always around JavaScript. Have you got any kind of tips? And obviously, in some way, your presentation at WordCamp Sacramento had some elements, not quite. But have you got some tips and some insights about why JavaScript's got a little bit of a bad rap when it comes to slowing sites down and problems?
Yep, for sure. So I would say the number one reason that I see out there is that you and I and probably everybody on this forum, we're all sitting in front of very shiny, nice computers with lots of cores in their processors, and we're running highly optimized setups because we're writing code, got a bunch of browser windows open all the time for our day jobs, and it's very easy to fall into the trap of everybody that's consuming my content or viewing my site has this level of power behind their computing system. The reality is, especially with some of the customers we see out there, their internet connections are poor, their computers might be older and slower. The reasons for this can vary from we've had clients that have had a demographic targeting the New York City subway, so they're expecting their internet to drop out repeatedly throughout the experience. So JavaScript, which relies on an internet connection to be persistent for AJAX calls, for example, that fails to account for the internet temporarily going away, can cause havoc with unexpected behavior. And that kind of, if you take that a step back, anytime JavaScript behaves differently, it does so on the back end, right, on the client side that you don't normally see. So if you test it in your browser and everything works fine there, there's always this risk that somebody else's setup is going to be different, right? It requires that you test multiple permutations of the code across a lot of different browsers and devices, and you need to be aware of the constraints of those devices and the fact that the code has to run there rather than a server you control.
All right, thanks for that. What about you, John? What's your experience with dealing with JavaScript and browse and the pain that can result? Any insights, John?
Well, definitely. I thought the presentation that you were referencing, it was a really good primer of just basic WordPress development when it comes to JavaScript. But it definitely, as Vascan mentioned, you have to make sure that you're respecting progressive enhancement and realize that not everyone has a the top level computer, and oftentimes they're on 2G, 3G phones, and you have to make sure that not every part of your site is like tied into JavaScript, because it can drop out, or they might have it turned off, and so yeah, definitely, you have to yeah.
What about you, Sally?
One of the sort of really basic things you have to watch out for is just conflicts. If you've got a theme or a plugin trying to load a script that's already been loaded, you run into some problems. And you sometimes also will see themes from our favorite not to be mentioned source that have 10 or 15 scripts loaded on every single page, on top of what might be loaded by a plugin or by WordPress itself, and the more is not merrier necessarily.
Yeah, I just wonder, Vasky, you get these you get called into these sites. I work in a different slightly sphere than what you do. I get called in, and you got a dog slow website, and you got all these JavaScript calls, and they're all in the header, and you try and move some of them down in the footer, and you move some, and when you try and move too many, the site won't load properly. Is it just? Why do you think it's still a bit pragmatic? Is there could there be some technology solutions, or is it bad coding or just general bad coding practice? Got any insights?
Yeah, I think that a large portion of that problem, and you might be surprised how similar what you just described is to our workflow on a lot of the sites that we deal with. And it's not just code we inherit, right? It's code that on an ongoing basis there's this tension between the marketing team that wants to get their ads loaded as soon as possible and the fact that as you wait for that JavaScript to load those ads, it's interrupting other aspects of the page, and we as engineers might want it to load as late as possible or not interrupt the rest of the page load. So those tensions are definitely there. At the end of the day, it becomes more of a client solution than a technical solution for us. People tend to drop as many scripts as they want. New analytics tool comes out. It's even more real-time than the last real-time tool, and the graphs have 7 colors instead of 5, so it's far better for all of us. So we jump to that, and I see a lot of editorial teams adopt a lot of things before they realize that these things aren't very useful, right? Deprovisioning those scripts is a heck of a lot harder than having somebody add them the first time. So just some cleanup and some question and answer with the customer around the lines of, why is this thing still in the header? Why do you need it to load? Is anybody looking at this metrics tool anymore? Is anybody using this analytics? And a lot of times it's just manual cleanup, right? If we can get that number of scripts from 10 down to 5 and we haven't messed with their business goals, then success. If they insist on keeping all 10 of them, then we have to make very clear through network traces, that kind of thing, Chrome or whatever, developer tools, that, hey, this script is sitting there for 2 seconds, or it's interrupting Google's ability to say your page is done loading, so it's causing your Google load time to look far longer than it actually is. And those arguments can be compelling, or they can fall on deaf ears.
Yeah, I think let's go on to one of the other presentations, because Luke Princine, I think I'm. What about Sally? You're going to put me right about how I'm pronouncing that, poor gentleman.
I'd have to go back and look at it again.
I'm notorious for Linsky.
What was the presentation, Jonathan?
All you have to do is study a couple of languages, and you'll get much better at it.
Will I? I can't even speak English, dear.
Yes, but almost all languages, except probably French, have clearer pronunciation rules than English does.
Oh, right. The JavaScript theme business in the front, WordPress in the back. I'm just going to say something, Baskine. I kind of talked to other developers that kind of utilize Drupal, and they utilize Expression Engine, and I meet the odd poor soul that's trying to struggle with Joomla. They constantly come out, WordPress spaghetti code, mixes style with logic. Um,
Does.
And this presentation was about some practical, maybe some practical solutions about using JavaScript libraries and using the Angular or a couple of the other really popular ones, and maybe some solutions. And I don't know if you had time to look at the presentation. I thought it was a really interesting and nice one. And I just wondered what you've got any views about that, because I thought you were the right guy to ask, really.
Yeah, I think that's one of those exciting possibilities that I think the automatic Calypso launch today sort of speaks to. We've seen a lot of requests come in from other platforms, be it workflow tools or essentially things that don't do a CMS well, but could benefit from having a CMS or a presentation layer associated with them. And what they see in the JSON REST API is truly a separation of the content management, the term data, the metadata, the addition of term metadata, right? And the sort of CMS growing as a place to generate and store content, but also the possibilities of a truly normalized JavaScript API, meaning that they can get that presentation layer into the hands of a lot more developers. Because while we come from a PHP predominant community where most of us started writing PHP plugins and added some JavaScript to them, there's a whole world of JavaScript engineers out there who are familiar with this language because they use it in commercial workflow tools that enable JavaScript layer customization, or even email tools I've seen and sort of corporate organization tools use JavaScript. It's a language that's well known outside of the WordPress community. So this integration with a normalized REST API gives those engineers the ability to communicate with WordPress in a way that perhaps before they might have said, well, I don't really want to dive into PHP, or I've kind of heard that it's a hodgepodge of spaghetti code. So this gives them a clean interface to work with, and the sort of data that they expect from all other applications in the cloud or on their local servers or wherever they might be. So it really does, from a business perspective, it explodes the number of people who can consume and update WordPress data without necessarily being in WordPress.
Yeah, and to follow through, would I be correct in saying that if that, and what happened this morning seems to be a direction that it's definitely going to, but does this have also consequences about making the integration of WordPress with a mobile application a more not a simple process, but more practical?
I think it does. I think that anytime you have sort of normalized data out there, it makes that process easier. The reason I hesitate is mobile app development is a world that I see being pushed in various disparate directions by some large companies that have very closed source philosophies, and I don't know, how long a world of being able to consume an open JSON API is a reality in Apple or Google's mind. But beyond that concern, I would say that it's definitely something that in the short term will enhance and ease development. I would just be wary for that sort of the giants control the infrastructure aspect of it.
Sally, have you had some conversations with clients where they kind of, look at WordPress, but then they're also looking at a mobile application for either iPhone or iPhone and Android, and they want to utilize what they've paid for on WordPress, and they're a bit disappointed when you give them some prices?
Well, I don't do app development. Second, none of my clients has so far expressed an interest in such a thing. In fact, there's a company called BizApps or something like that was trying to sell me this sort of reseller package for, create an app using our toolkit sort of thing, which looked like, it might be an interesting add-on for some people if they could justify it. But if what you're building is basically a website versus an app with a specific purpose, I'm not sure how much advantage you're going to have in having an app versus a decent responsive site, because how many people are going to go out there and download your app unless you're big enough to be pushing it for a whole lot of people, whereas everybody can find your website. But I do think the interesting thing about the API and is that, you know, as Vaskin was saying, you know, it's never been possible to be just a front-end developer in WordPress because you have to know PHP. You don't actually happen to know JavaScript, which I pretty much don't, but you have to know PHP to build a theme, and that's different from other content management systems where they have a lot more separation between your content and your display and your function.
All right. What about you, John? Got any experience about, you know, people kind of have a website and they say, oh, we want an app, and you know, you say responsive, but they say, I want an app, I want native code. Do you have those conversations, and do you think what's happened today in a direct way will affect maybe that conversation?
Well, even though the clients that I generally run across are smaller in scale than the ones that Vaskin runs across, I actually have had a lot of conversations like that recently.
Yeah.
I had a client where I built an internal tool, and it was only for like their employees. But talking to the employees, one of the first things they asked are, does that have an app? Because to them, that was the most convenient way to access the site. But what they were looking for wasn't really necessarily an app. It was the ability to have full functionality on their phone and use the site on their phone. So I think for a lot of smaller clients, you know, a good responsive site that has full functionality on their phone is enough. But I think as you move up the chain to larger clients, having an app makes more sense, and especially if you're pushing things out to a mass audience. And in that case, I think, you know, having the REST API and having separation of the presentation is going to make a lot more sense. And the presentation that you were referencing, Jonathan, the guy was talking about, he basically gave a breakdown of the model view controller breakdown and how WordPress uses a backbone and then handlebars to do templating. But as Vaskin mentioned, what this is going to do with the REST API is it is going to bring a lot more people in because they will be able to use different JavaScript frameworks with WordPress and use a language that they're familiar with, and that's intriguing to them. And I think that is going to open up a lot more development in the WordPress ecosystem.
Yeah, thanks for that. That were my own views. Backbone. You know, there's a lot of, you know, it's one of the great things about JavaScript at the present moment, and one of the drawbacks. There's a lot of libraries, and there's a lot of new ones, and there's a lot of tools, and you know, Backbone, Angular. Are there any particular of these libraries that you particularly feel work that you like, and do you think, you know, what's your view about that?
Yeah, I think I share mostly your overall skepticism of the number of tools that are introduced into the ecosystem on a regular basis, and regardless of their quality, how effective they can be, given that we're not sure whether they'll be maintained or become the de facto standard or disappear in 6 months. So I think that for the most part, we've tended to relegate those libraries to one-off projects or an engineer's hobby project when they might have free time and decide to expand their skill set a little bit. So it's not so much that we've centralized on React or on Backbone or, you know, something like that for a JavaScript standard. We've used a few of these different libraries and frameworks before. Our director of web engineering, Taylor Lovett, has a _Backbone theme that, implements a basic collection to retrieve the data and update it. So we've kind of dabbled in it, but I don't think that it's something beyond a few particular implementations where we specifically engineered something to meet a client's needs. We haven't made a decision across the board that we've centralized on a certain library, like we would with jQuery, for example.
Right. So most of the trouble that I come across is around jQuery. And I love jQuery, and I've got to quickly tell you a little bit about my background. I got into it the normal way as a hobby, and then I got into ActionScript with Flash, and I did a bit of JavaScript. I bought one of those big rocks books, those red books, and the early days where there weren't libraries, and it was a nightmare to get anything to work with a DOM on different browser DOMs, object models. It was just a freaking nightmare. And then I never thought JavaScript would come back so strong with libraries. So I love JavaScript, but it just seems to get into a mess sometimes. So is it now you got jQuery already inbuilt into WordPress? Got any insight? Is it just kind of laziness, or are there real reasons why so many plugins and utilize external jQuery libraries? Got any insights?
So I think truly external jQuery libraries that are being brought in are a combination of engineers simply just not understanding why some of the features that they're trying to preserve from older versions are no longer available, or not, because again, jQuery does tend to create breaking updates. Eventually you have to update your code. And one of the nice things about a WordPress plugin is it can sit there for 3 or 4 years, and thanks to the care and feeding that WordPress puts into backwards compatibility, the PHP will probably continue to work through several iterations of new versions. But the minute a breaking version of jQuery comes out that, for example, drops the .live method, any code that utilizes that method is going to stop working. The reality is that code probably shouldn't be there and should have been updated years ago, but it's not going to break until the version of jQuery breaks it. So because of that, I think you see a lot of folks that are willing to just solve that quickly by saying, well, fine, if WordPress upgraded this version of jQuery, it doesn't work anymore, and I've got 5 people in my forums that are badgering me for a solution, I'm just going to include my own version of jQuery. Now you have the version conflicts and other conflicts that Sally was referring to. You have, all sorts of other issues that are going to crop up because people are using old and non-performant code. And really, I think it speaks to the folks not recognizing the proliferation of devices that this thing is going to run on, and realizing that the reason that there's a lot of iteration and change in the JavaScript world is to improve performance and to make these shortcut methods more efficient, because ultimately that's what jQuery is. It's a shortcut for us as engineers and developers to make our lives easier and to solve the complexities and quirks of the DOM, like you mentioned. So doing that without a drop-off in performance is a constant struggle and a constant iteration. So I think that's a reason you tend to see a lot of these scripts appear there as individual includes, and frankly, I think it's just either a lack of understanding or a lack of time to do proper maintenance on the JavaScript code to bring it up to date with those libraries.
Yeah, it's unfortunate situation really, because I think it gives WordPress a bit of a bad rap, doesn't it?
Yeah, because it creates some pretty difficult to troubleshoot issues, and again, it's that sort of, it has to be running in a particular browser, and also there has to be the certain 2 plugins installed, in coordination on the same site, and that causes some sort of namespace conflict, and then all of a sudden the code begins not breaking in a way that you'd expect, but in some quirky way because the variable is changing halfway through it. So these are not easy to diagnose problems. They're the kind of problems that people eventually throw their hands up and say, I can't get this to work, and once one part of the JavaScript breaks, then you're liable to have other parts of it break as well. So
you know what I do? I'll give it to my chief engineer.
There you go. There you go. There you go.
It just really helps. It just saves me a lot of my hair, actually. So What about you, John? So, you know, how do you know when you're making a custom theme or you're brought in to customize a theme and there's some of these conflicts and that, how do you deal with it and how do you deal with the conversation you have to have with the client?
Yeah, most of the time, I mean, and I'm not like an elite JavaScript developer. I'll never claim that. I mean, and most of the stuff I do is with either vanilla JavaScript or jQuery. But that is the thing that I run into most of the time is either a conflict with jQuery versions, and diagnosing that is you know, finding where there's conflict is usually the first step, and making sure you just making sure that everything is like playing nice with each other is basically what I have to do. With the clients, I mean, it's not really like a conversation I usually have to have. That's usually something that I take care of on my end. So, you know.
What about you, Sally? What's your experience with dealing with these type of problems, and how do you deal with the client's frustration and that?
Well, the client's frustration is usually it doesn't work. They have no idea where it's coming from, and they just want somebody to find it and fix it. And they may have, I got asked to help out on someone's e-commerce site, and there were, in this case, it hasn't so far been script conflicts, although I'm amazed given the number of scripts that are being loaded. But there were some things that the theme was messing up that were overriding the WooCommerce settings that were, and sometimes you just kind of have to go in and dig. So yeah, you sometimes have to explain. It can take a while to diagnose this stuff. It's not always obvious where it's coming from, and sometimes it's not that easy to fix. I mean, my preference with this particular site is, for God's sake, kill it and kill the theme and start over again with something that's actually been adequately coded, because I just don't think there's any salvaging some of these themes.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's great words, Sally. How's the cat? I see a tail in the picture somewhere. Oh yes, he's a bit of a beast, isn't he? Or she. She. All right, thank you. So, Baskin, is there no practical steps that might make this situation a little bit manageable, or is it just you get great flexibility and power from WordPress, but there's going to be some drawbacks, or is there some practical ways that this situation could be improved? Because I'm getting a little bit frustrated with this myself.
So I think that, and I've touched on this a little bit at some previous talks that I've given. I think that it's a two-parter, right? One is, I think the WordPress community as a whole needs to start holding itself to the same standards for JavaScript code that goes into publicly available plugins as they do for PHP, right? And that means as we start to see JavaScript code that doesn't have proper closures, for example, and therefore is creating variables in a global namespace, a lot of these JavaScript traps that you mentioned from that talk you alluded to, those are really the common problems that we see that are causing third-party distributed plugins not to work with one another. So these namespace conflicts, the global variable conflicts, these can all be avoided with proper coding practice. If you look at PHP standards for WordPress, they're well fleshed out. They're mostly agreed upon. The code standards we have on the 10up site are a small variation from what the WordPress standards are. They're more about process and workflow enhancement than they are about changing those standards. And so what we don't see in the community is that same amount of documentation, amount of standardization around JavaScript. There's maybe 2 or 3 pages that essentially echo JavaScript and jQuery best practices and reiterate that that's how WordPress does things. So a lot of the community's sort of acceptance of these plugins and I think what we all do, which is dig in and solve the problems, like John said, that are confronting our client today and solve those namespace conflicts for the plugins that we're running into. But it's a lot harder to hold the plugin authors accountable and follow up with them and make sure that they're making these improvements. So I think that part of it is we really need to, as a community, I don't want to say less accepting of bad JavaScript, but I think we need to be proactive in addressing it and helping others correct it when it occurs in their plugins.
Oh, great. That's fantastic. I just want to introduce David into the conversation. He's one of our great panel members. So, Dave, so have you been kind of, apart from the custom work that you do, let's say you're brought into a project and they've got some of these JavaScript library conflicts and it's just a mess. How do you deal with it, and how do you deal with the kind of awkward conversation you might have to have with the client? Oh, no sound. You got no sound, Dave. Yeah, no sound. Oh, we'll get back to him.
Does Tim have sound yet?
No sound, Dave? No sound, Dave. All right. He'll come back. He'll come back. This is Google Hangouts for you. So, it was one of my ones that I threw in at the last minute that Sally loves. So, term mater. I've struggled with that. Maybe John, it's taken almost 6 years for it to become, in the next update of WordPress. What benefits do you think it will, and why is it? Do you think it's taken 6 years?
Well, I think the core team's doing a good job with going back and getting some of these old tickets. In the last version, they changed the conflicting slugs for categories and posts. But I think the term meta, I think this is kind of underplayed in this version. And the way I understand it, basically, is normally we're able to manipulate posts and custom post types through a lot of metadata. But with taxonomies, we haven't had that ability thus far at the same degree. And we're going to be able to do that now with taxonomies at the same level that we do posts. And I think that's going to allow us to have a lot more versatility in how we present stuff in our themes. So.
Oh, let's have another go, David. You think he's talking? Oh, he's here. So, Dave.
You can hear me now?
Yeah, you're great.
Okay.
Yeah, clear as a bell. So we were discussing, term meta, coming part of core. Do you think you can give a practical example or some insights how this new functionality is going to make a difference to a developer?
I love I'm just getting tossed right into it. Let's see. I'm trying to think. I actually haven't given much thought for how I'm going to be making use of it, so that probably was not the question to jump me in on.
That's fine. I'll put you in the meeting. I apologise, David, but it goes with the territory.
Yes. Well, the obvious example is if you've ever needed a featured image for a category or for a custom taxonomy, this has, you can get plugins that do this, and they all kind of do it in a sort of kludgy way to work around. And yet, it's fairly often that you might want to show a featured image for a category or a taxonomy that, WooCommerce uses as category images for its product categories, for instance. And having a standardized way to do that and having it built in will make it easier. And it's taken a long time, partly because first they had to do that splitting of the, because it used to be that a term would be shared. If you had both a category and a tag with the same name, they would just use the one term. And they had to first split those out and then, kind of make that happen without breaking everything. And then, before they could get to the point of doing this with it. And, given the number of things that have been done with post meta, I would think there are probably a lot of applications for term meta that we haven't seen yet, or that might get pulled out of the options table or the post meta table or wherever else they've been kind of lurking as people try to make them happen.
Oh, thanks, Sally. What about you, Vaskin? What do you think the benefits of this are going to be, are there performance benefits? Is it going to save time? Can provide more options? Why should developers be excited about this?
So I think it could have the potential to significantly improve performance on some of these solutions, like Sally said, that are based on kind of kludgy workarounds, or it forces the developer of that plugin to make a choice of, do I want to drop this in the options table? Do I want to make a custom post type and hide it and store my options there, or some other weird workaround for enhancing out the terms to be able to have things like meta attached to them. So this standardizes that. I think that the other concern that we'd have performance-wise is obviously this adds additional meta to a thing which in and of itself is sort of meta to begin with. So I don't want to call it meta inception, but there's sort of this level of, as we get deeper and deeper into these queries, they're going to be confusing queries to our databases, right? So where we've started to see things like the term splitting, that automated update process actually broke a lot of our larger site builds, because there was so much meta there that the updates simply timed out, right, in large production databases. And there's several track tickets in around fixing that and improving that, and I think those fixes are going to go into what eventually releases and will ensure that meta, or that term, that those terms are split prior to term meta being enabled on them. So even as they try to roll out this process of updating things, we're starting to see how it's pushing the envelope of database scalability for WordPress, and it's going to require some, I think, for larger sites, some ingenious solutions to work around just the proliferation of data that we're looking at from the CMS, not just having metadata about the data, but having metadata about the metadata about the data.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and especially when you were saying that, WooCommerce came to mind, because I think that's one very common solution that this problem might rear its head quite rapidly, mightn't it? What do you think?
Definitely, definitely. Although I think that if the APIs are designed intelligently, and I imagine that they are in core, then again, because WooCommerce is now part of the Automatic family, it gives them a lot of power to transform that code and use things like term meta, right? Which, if we run into a term meta scaling problem, at least that's a common problem, right? We ran into that on 4 or 5 different sites, and a few other engineers at other sites in the San Francisco area ran into it. We were all solving the same problem. So the unified approach that term meta gives us means that the scalability problems we'll be solving are all the same type of problem, rather than now I have WP options bloat versus now I have post meta bloat, depending on how I chose to store that data, because there wasn't a true data store for that type of data.
Oh, thanks for that. That was great. David, we discussed the kind of announcement this morning from Automatic about JavaScript. I don't know if you're aware of the announcement. If you are, was you surprised? Have you got any comments about it?
Yeah, I did take a look at Nat's blog post earlier today, and I mean, I suppose it's I would say it's a surprise, just kind of like bringing it out there. I'm sure there are people who probably were already aware of it, but at the same time, it kind of seems like a lot of things that WordPress core already does. Maybe just without having reviewed it, my guess is that there's probably more a focus on the future, less a focus on maintaining the past. Because there's already a fair amount of the admin that runs JavaScript anyway.
Yeah.
Like there's already a lot of Node being used. They, clearly pulled people from teams that were already doing this internally with the current WordPress to build out this new system. I'm sure it'll make a lot of people happy, and I'm sure it's probably got a lot of people already nervous. I've already seen plenty of people today going, well, looks like I need to start brushing up on my JavaScript skills, which, frankly, they should have been doing for the past 2 years anyway with a lot of the new features in the WordPress, but maybe that'll give people the kick in the butt to get on that.
Yeah, are there any other particular libraries? Because we had a quick discussion of, one of the strengths of JavaScript is it's a very active community, a lot of active tools, a lot of libraries, but that's also the drawback. There's a lot of new libraries, a lot of new tools, a lot of stuff going on. Are there any particular ones that you're attracted to that you found you could rely on, or do you just use one for every, specifically for the project you're working on?
Well, I mean, each one has their own place, and that's kind of the problem, or that's the problem that I'm seeing, is that each one has its own place, but let's say someone is trying to figure out where to get started. That's probably the hardest place I'm seeing. Which one do I start with? There's so many, and if I talk to so-and-so, they're like, oh, Ember all the way, and then I talk to this other person, they're like, no, screw Ember, it's all Angular, and then, this other person's like, all React, and you hear so many conflicting opinions. Well, this one's only good for this thing. This one's good for this thing if you use it in conjunction. Blah blah blah. I have not yet seen anyone give a really great, let's say, getting started workflow. Like, hey, you want to get started. Which one of these should you be looking at first, depending on what task you want to do? That said, the one that probably interests and excites me the most is React, just because it's the one that I'm seeing. Maybe they're just more vocal or something, but it's the one I'm seeing the community embrace the most. It's probably the one that I'm seeing becoming most popular since like jQuery, because a lot of the other ones are very popular, but that's the one that feels the most WordPress to me, where everyone touts how it's this open source project, because apparently the other ones aren't open source too, even though they are. That can do all of this and this and that. And,
that's great. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah.
Vaskin, obviously, if you got intermediate developer that approaches you for some mentorship or advice, and they were asking you, they wanted to get into JavaScript more than jQuery, which of these libraries and what kind of advice would you give such an individual?
So I found that reading the Douglas Crockford Introduction to JavaScript, I think is the title of the book, or Principles of JavaScript. It's freely available on the web, and it's a very opinionated guide to JavaScript. It's 20-year-old document at this point, and it really reflects Douglas Crockford's very opinionated take on the language that he helped create. So I think what it does is it really helps you understand what is consistent about JavaScript, where it has quirks, what it means to actually be dealing with the root JavaScript language versus a lot of the libraries and extensions. And it both helps you understand what's happening behind the scenes in those libraries and gain an appreciation for how those libraries can help, right? Because a lot of, like I said earlier, a lot of what jQuery does is solves the problems that exist because Internet Explorer 8 implements JavaScript differently than Chrome, differently than this week's version of Firefox, right? So it's kind of difficult to write code for 20 different browsers at a time, and a library that helps you bring that down to a single set of browsers and sort of traps and looks for those quirks and handles them as necessary becomes a really, really nice tool. Without that knowledge of why those quirks are there or what jQuery is doing, it becomes a less powerful tool, because you can do some pretty darn destructive stuff using jQuery, selecting every element in the DOM, binding a function to it, and before you know it, the whole site goes down because somebody adds 5 widgets to the page. So it's definitely a very powerful tool, but I recommend that people take a look at sort of where the language is coming from and understand that it is a language that is the same, but the way it's implemented across these browsers is very different, and there is a lot less consistency across the JavaScript runtime than you might think.
I think that's a great insight myself. When I was coding with ActionScript and I got into JavaScript and I was making some applications, it was the crux of the problem was the DOM structures of the different browsers and how you dealt with that, and it was a nightmare and it was one of the reasons why JavaScript looked like it was going to die out, was the amount of, it just didn't work effectively with different DOM structures. And then suddenly, I think, was it jQuery was the first kind of library that really became popular, that really kind of solved to some extent that problem. Am I correct about that, Askin?
Yeah, there were some previous attempts. I think Prototype was one, and then there's want to say MooTools or something like
Yes,
that was one
MooTools.
that, yeah. So obviously the need was recognized in the community, and I think jQuery was kind of the first one that had that real impetus behind it to get it off the ground and get the adoption it needed.
So I think what you said about, I think if you don't understand that fundamental problem which these libraries came about to solve, you're missing something. But then if you go over there, is there, I'm trying probably asking you a question which you can't or not prepared to answer. Is there any particular one of these libraries that you got that person and they've done that little bit of reading, you would kind of push and maybe look at that first library?
I would say from a front-end perspective, I'm partial to Backbones from the limited experience I've had with it and what I've seen. It definitely follows that MVC structure, and if you're familiar with that or you're coming from a more traditional PHP background and entering into WordPress from that side, it's kind of a good an intro. But other than that, I would say really my personal take on it is don't be enamored by all these libraries. None of them are magic, right? I think a lot of what I try to teach people is go and look up what the jQuery function does, right? The actual selector that goes out there and tries to figure out what DOM element you've passed it. It's going through a lot of different ways to shortcut itself and figure out that this is a class or this is an ID or whatever it's looking for, but at the end of the day, it's falling back on a lot of JavaScript methods, right? It's just trying a lot of them in successive order to see if they exist, if the browser's capable of them, if they work the way we'd expect them to work, if there's another method on that browser that's actually faster. But it's really just hacking together 45 different approaches to finding a DOM element, right? And when people see that, it sort of breaks the mythos of the whole JavaScript library, and you realize why it's there, right? And reading the Crockford book helps too, because this is a description of the language that's also a polemic, right? It's very much an opinionated piece, and that helps understand what JavaScript is, which is really a convention for implementation of a scripting language, right? And that's where all the browser quirks come up, and all this sort of infighting that you see in the community is a result of this not being a single language. It is a bunch of interpreters around a single language. So I think that really getting involved in sort of demystifying these libraries is more important than picking the first one. I think once you realize that they're an attempt to solve a specific problem, then you can make those decisions. Like Dave said, there's 50 libraries out there, and everybody says they're great for this, but not for this, and a lot of that is because they are built very purpose-built, right? And so understanding what they're doing, being able to take a quick look at how they're architected and say, yeah, this will work for my purpose, or no, this is going to be a box that I can't fit my application into. Those skills, I think, come from understanding, JavaScript, where it's coming from, and what these frameworks and libraries are trying to do.
Yeah, I just want to ask, thanks for that, Vaskin. That was a great insight. Sally, I kind of really frustrated with the JavaScript community because, the versatility, the opinion, it's great stuff, and it's a very dynamic community, but it's also, it's very fashion-led and to me, it has also some of the worst aspect of the web development community. It's very...
Oh, gee, there couldn't be anybody here who's ever suffered from shiny object syndrome.
Never. All right. What's your take on that, John?
The JavaScript community is just like every other community. People are going to have strong opinions, and people are going to try new things as they come along. And I think it's all about seeing what lasts and what tools bear out as being the best for particular situations. So.
Yeah, thanks. What's your opinion, David? Because it does really. I take what Sally said, but it to me, I just get the impression, David, that it's extreme with JavaScript.
So I'm actually thinking back to an old XKCD comic because pretty much any joke there is to be made, he's made it already. But I believe it was one recently, or a few years ago that was about, there's 15 competing standards for this JavaScript library. Let's write one that that unites them all together. And then the punchline is, great, now there's 16 competing standards for this library here. Everyone has that idea, not everyone, but a lot of people have the idea of, I will do it the best.
But have you got any insights why there's such a proliferation of these libraries? Why it's going, and is it going to change, and is it going to settle down?
I think it's one of those things. It's similar to how everyone has their own method of solving different problems in WordPress itself. Is that it's really easy to get started. Like you can learn enough JavaScript to build your own library, and I mean, sure, some of them will take off very well because they have funding or they have a unique marketing perspective or something. But I should say, somebody with JavaScript with really intense JavaScript skill can come in there and create their own library and give a good use case for it and make a shiny looking website that shows it off and get people to follow them. That's not to say that these people haven't done a lot of work, but the barrier to entry is maybe lower than certain other projects they could be doing.
Yeah,
I hesitate. I don't want to belittle the work anyone's done without saying that it's still, it is. There's not a lot of barrier there.
No, I think your insight into that was very fair, David. Well, actually, we're getting close to the hour. My co-host is reminding me. It's just gone so quickly. I just want to say I think, we've got a doggy there. Oh, he's got, oh, God. Got two. Oh, dear. So, yeah, they birthed them. Basinski will want to barbecue him, I think. Well, sorry, I couldn't resist it.
I'll have it known on the record I successfully returned a Chihuahua to its rightful owner this afternoon after it decided to run away from home. So
not to barbecue it?
No, not only do I not consume dogs, but I help them find their homes. So I just want that.
Okay, we'll put it on the record. Does not eat dogs.
Yeah, the 8-week labs.
All right. So Vaskin, what's the best way for people to follow you, to see your words of wisdom? And you've had some really good words of wisdom tonight. I've really enjoyed our discussion. So what's the best way for people to consume more of your knowledge?
So I would say follow me on Twitter at Vaskin Howry. It's just my full name. Nothing fancy or complicated there. And the information there ranges from stuff that's germane to this discussion to things that aren't really germane to anything. I also blog a little bit on a site called Simple Canvas, which is simplecanv.as. And then, of course, tenup.com I occasionally publish on there. The reality is I focus a ton of my time and effort internally into TenUp, so another great way, and I'll always throw this pitch out there, is to join the TenUp team.
Right, that's great news. Jake's a great guy, and you've got a great team. I do admire the work you're doing there, and your contributions generally to the WordPress community. Sally, what's the best way for people to follow you and get more of Sally?
You can find me on Twitter at Sally Getch, and I have a business blog at WP-Fangirl.com and a personal blog at SallyGetch.com.
Thanks, Sally. It's been great. What about you, David? If they want more knowledge of David, what's the best way to stick it?
Well, same with this conversation. I'll always be late to the conversation on Twitter at David Laeta. So come check out my reposted memes from 5 years ago. Okay, I'm getting cut off. Yeah, just at David Laeta. No special spelling either.
That's the hour.
Thanks, Dave, for joining in.
We're over time.
Yeah, he loves his clocks, folks. John, what's the best way?
Labs.
Yeah, God. John, what's the best way of getting hold of you?
Best way to get a hold of me is follow me on Twitter. I'm lockdown_, and you can also read my blog at lockdowndesign.com.
Oh, thanks, folks. I really think it's been an interesting discussion, and I think the flow was really good, and we kept on subject, and I think we gave some insights about the world of JavaScript. Thanks, folks.
I do have another resource actually
go on,
that I think Vaskin will like, which is this week or last week at PHP World. I saw Eric Mann give a presentation. I think it was just called JavaScript for WordPress or something, JavaScript for PHP. Basically, it was JavaScript for people who are developing WordPress. He's an entertaining speaker, so it won't bore you to death like some technical talks will. And it had a few good examples. Basically, like a getting started if you already are coming from that WordPress world. They were recording them all. I'm pretty sure they're all already up at PHP Architect on YouTube.
Oh, thanks for that, David. Baskin, I've got to say, I really I did actually. I'm nowhere a top engineer. I know my limits, but I really did enjoy your presentation at WordPress Sacramento. I thought you were dealing with quite a complicated technical topic, but I learned something from it, and I thought it was great. Did you enjoy the presentation and the weekend?
I did, yes, and thank you for that. And yeah, it was a great event, and I really enjoyed the time there. I think the discussion, that we were having a little bit earlier around, the venue being a nice, start and a very wonderful place to have the event in terms of parking and I think the rooms, like we were discussing, had a very intimate feel. It was a little bit interesting for me as a speaker to be kind of pivoting back and forth to reach everybody in the room, but I think that at the end of the day, the organization leading up to the event and how everything was handled the day of, I think that it really speaks to the quality of the folks that were organizing it and their experience around it, because I've been to a lot of WordCamps where as you drive up, you don't know where you're parking, you don't know where you're going, you don't know where to get your badge, and this was from the start, there was a guiding path for everybody there. So I think that speaks to the quality of the organization.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And also, to our presenters, also on our panel, did a presentation, John and Sally. I didn't see yours, John, regrettably, but I did see Sally's, and I thought you did a fantastic job, Sally. And we actually talked about it when we did a kind of WP special with John. I really did enjoy your presentation, Sally.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was
I
very
saw Sally's slides and they looked awesome, so I can't wait to see it on WordPress TV.
I keep checking to see whether they're up yet.
No, it was a very insightful presentation, and I thought you did a fantastic job, Sally. Right? Well, I think that's it, folks. I think the time Nazi, he's got off now. Maybe one of the Labradors has done a runner. I don't know. All right, then, folks.
Hey, everyone, good sound. Everyone did a great job, except for Jonathan. He went over time, so he got an F. But everyone else got A+.
We should do a live. We should do a live in-person one at WordCamp US.
Yeah, I wish we were going next year.
Yeah, next year. Maybe. Oh, it is next year, isn't it?
And by the way, Bill, how to get a hold of Bill? Well, you can go to netcasting101.com, which really sucks, the website right now, or podcastershome.com.
Right, Vaskin, thank you so much.
It was really good
for coming on, and I think we covered some interesting stuff, didn't we?
Certainly. It's been an interesting day in the WordPress JavaScript community, so
yeah.
This was well timed.
Oh,
anyway, very good.
See you later, folks. Bye.